Okay, let's dive into something really interesting today. You've sent us some source material. It's basically a breakdown of points people talk about online concerning Goodluck Jonathan's presidency in Nigeria, roughly 2010 to 2015.
Right.
And this source, it even mentions a specific quote, one you see everywhere, supposedly from Wole Soyinka. But importantly, the source itself says, look, we can't actually verify he said that.
And that's a perfect starting point, isn't it?
Yeah.
It shows how these things circulate. What we want to do here, our mission, is to take the specific points and facts laid out in your source and see what they tell us about that time.
Exactly.
We're sticking strictly what you've given us, digging into those details.
Good. So let's kick off with something everyone feels, fuel prices. Your source brings up the claim, fuel being around 86 per liter.
Yeah, and the source confirms that price range was about, 86 to maybe 97 a liter during that period.
Okay, but how is that possible?
Well, the how, according to your source, is the key bit. It was down to massive government subsidies, billions spent every year. The source actually cites over 2.1 trillion just for the subsidy in 2011.
Wow, you're 2.1 trillion. That's huge. And the source notes this was, well, pretty controversial, right? Seen as unsustainable, maybe corrupt.
Definitely. And remember the 2012 Occupy Nigeria protests.
Oh, yeah.
The source links them directly to the government trying to partially remove that exact subsidy.
Right. So the low price at the pump, as your source shows, had this enormous cost behind it, and trying to change it caused, well, a major public reaction, a real balancing act.
Exactly. It highlights that tension.
Okay, moving from fuel to food, rice. Another common point your source mentions is the price, maybe around 8,000 for a bag.
Yes, the source backs that up too. Typically 7,000 to 10,000 for like a 50-kilogram bag.
And why was it around that price then?
The source gives a few reasons. Borders were apparently, relatively porous, so imports were easier. Combine that with pretty stable exchange rates at the time, and it helped keep imported food prices lower. But the source also adds there was investment in local production too, mentioning things like the agricultural transformation agenda.
So, a mix of things, according to the source. Easier imports helped by borders and the exchange rate, but also some effort to boost local farming. Shows different strategies happening at once.
Precisely. Now, let's shift focus a bit maybe towards education. Your source talks about new federal universities. The number 17 gets mentioned a lot.
Yeah, what does the source actually say on that one?
It clarifies things. It says 12 new federal universities were established between 2011 and 2013, and some existing ones got upgraded too.
Okay, so 12 new ones.
Yeah. And the goal, as stated in the source, was pretty clear. Expand access to higher education, especially get universities into states that didn't have a federal one before.
That seems like a concrete policy initiative from the source. And sticking with education, what about the Almajiri schools it mentions?
Right. The source confirms over 100 of these Almajiri model schools were built mostly up north.
And the idea was?
The stated aim, according to the source, was to integrate traditional Quranic learning with, a Western-style curriculum, and hopefully reduce street begging by giving kids formal schooling.
Makes sense. But was it successful long-term?
Well, that's the catch the source notes. It says many of these schools had trouble staying open or effective after the administration ended. Sustainability issues.
Okay, so big ambitions. Projects started, but maybe follow-through was a challenge based on the source. Let's look at another big economic thing your source highlights. The exchange rate. People often remember it around, what, $1 to 165?
Yeah, the source confirms the Naira was pretty stable then, trading around 150 to 165 against the U.S. dollar for most of that time.
And how did they manage that stability?
The source explains it was largely possible because global oil prices were quite high, averaging around $100 a barrel.
Ah, the oil revenue.
Exactly. That gave the central bank plenty of foreign reserves, dollars basically, to step into the market and, defend the Naira's value. They used the oil money to keep the exchange rate stable.
But the source doesn't just leave it there, does it? It mentions downsides.
No, it definitely includes the criticism. Many argued, according to the source, that this rate was kind of artificial. And crucially, maintaining it meant burning through those foreign reserves that you needed for, future stability.
So a trade-off, as the source presents it. Stability then, but potentially at the expense of financial buffers later on.
That's the debate the source points to.
Okay, and finally, maybe the biggest economic headline from that time, also in your source, Nigeria becoming Africa's largest economy.
Yes, the source presents this as a factual event. In 2014, Nigeria rebased its GDP calculations.
Rebasing, what's that mean in simple terms?
It's like updating the measuring stick for the economy. They hadn't done it in years. So when they did, the source explains it included sectors that had grown huge but weren't properly counted before, like telecoms, Nollywood, the film industry, e-commerce.
Gotcha. So the economy looked bigger partly because we were counting it better.
Exactly. That recalculation pushed Nigeria's GDP over $500 billion, overtaking South Africa. So it reflected real diversification, but the jump itself was statistical, according to the source.
Though the source does add that some people question how much that new number actually changed things for the average person on the street.
Right. A statistical milestone, yes, but the source notes the debate about the real-world impact.
So unpacking these points just from your source material, it paints a much more detailed picture than just a single viral claim, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
You see specific actions like building universities, but also these really complex economic situations like the subsidies or the exchange rate, which, as the source shows, came with big costs and criticisms.
And the source consistently implies you can't really understand these points without the wider context. It provides things like global oil prices, the way the economy was already structured, policy choices. It's all connected.
Hopefully walking through these points based only on the source you provided gives you, our listener, a clearer view of some key issues from that time. It really shows how even things that sound good on the surface, cheap fuel, stable currency, had these complex trade-offs and debates happening, according to the material itself.
And maybe this whole process, starting with that unverified quote and then digging into the facts and context from your source, maybe it raises a question for you listening. What does this tell you about how we should evaluate information, especially when it comes to political history or legacies?
That's a great takeaway. It's a solid reminder to always try and look deeper for the how and the why and the nuances that good source material, like the one you sent us, can actually provide instead of just, settling for the easy headline.